Oh, God,
Three,
it's live. All
two,
right.
one. Hey everybody, it's podcast time. Had Amanda Collins last week. We got Bryan Langan. I'm going to say it wrong at least once in the show. We'll go over that here in a little bit. It's almostagreement at gmail.com. Find us on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. Go to our website, almostagreement.com. While you're there, you can check out the Voter Guide 22. We'll have a link to this show with Bryan, as well as my link to Amanda last week and anybody else I get in this November upcoming races. And we're also working on trying to get somebody who's currently like a Mandis or a Massey to come in and go over the 4 ballot items so that we can understand what those actually mean correctly this time. So we're going to do that among other things. Go to your favorite podcast provider, give us a like, share, friend, follow, that kind of thing. Tell your friends about us, all that kind of stuff. Let's get this intro out of the way, and me and Bryan will start chatting.
Here, here.
I used to be good about timing the intro, but oh well. I get excited and talk real fast, and then I blow through it. All right, so Langan, right? Am I saying that right?
Langan.
Langan, okay. Like I
Yeah,
said, I knew
you
I'd
did.
screwed up at least once, so let's get it out of the way early. I keep wanting to throw an R in. I keep wanting to be like Largan or Langer. I don't know why. That's what my brain says.
So usually somebody wants to throw a D in and do Langdon.
Mm.
That's the most common one I hear.
Well, now that's what's going to be my accidental go-to from now on. That's good. You don't have to worry about it right in. You're on the ballot, so people don't have to know how to spell it. They just need to know that it's not Briggs or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so District 7 in the state Senate, that's what, the northwest portion of Knox County?
No, actually, my district it's fairly big. It's kind of shaped like Massachusetts. That's the best way I can kind of describe it. So we start in Farragut, run kind of along 40 and kind of up the north side of 40, up into a bit of Hardin Valley and Carnes area and West Hills. And it gets real skinny, kind of near where 640 meets 40 and cuts down into campus, then comes up just east of Broadway, and then opens up wider up into Powell.
Okay, because I know, like, parts of the halls at least are 6, because I thought it was weird that, because I'm way out here in Rocky Hill, and that's District 6 with Massey, and then a good buddy of mine who lives in like Halls proper is also 6. Because we were arguing about something the other day, and I had to look up his registration status on KGIS, and I was like, oh, you are 6. So I was a little surprised on that. Yeah, and then what's his face from Oak Ridge pops down for a little bit of that too, just to make it extra confusing.
They have tied a lot of downtown Knoxville in with Anderson, Loudoun County, and District 5.
I wonder why that is.
Yeah. So
I mean, those in control do what they can to keep it. That's the world we live in. So
and they've had 2 opportunities now.
Yeah, it's been a couple of census cycles that they've had enough control to do some work with it. All right, so that's out of the way. Let's I don't know. How is this? We always start off with more of a give me the brief history of Bryan. Like, where did Bryan grow up and that kind of thing, and then what got Bryan into politics?
Okay. Well, I never thought I'd actually run for office or really be in politics, so we'll just get that out of the way there. I grew up kind of a little bit all over the place. Pennsylvania for a while, South Carolina for a while, lived in Toronto, Ontario for 2 years, and then been in Tennessee for the last 22 years.
Okay.
So yeah, ended up graduating from UT Knoxville and never left the area. So I've been in Knoxville for over 20 years now.
I gotcha. I came down in high school and then went to college here and then didn't bother leaving. So I can't disagree with your format.
Yeah.
So where do the politics come from? Like, what's
I mean, I've always paid attention to politics. I've always been kind of one of those, like, I voted and everything, but I never really got that involved with any specific campaigns. But I always kind of paid attention to what was going on. And this cycle, so I was working for a while during COVID and I got injured and ended up leaving my job and being a stay-at-home dad for a little bit. And I was essentially looking at going back to work. And with, we've figured out we can survive off my wife's salary. She has a nice job. So anyway, we decided with everything going on with them, the way they were attacking our public schools, our healthcare workers, our teachers, banning books, forcing vouchers, and then this whole abortion ban thing, that maybe I'd take that time to try to get involved and volunteer and start doing some things like that. Ended up talking with Matt at KCDP, asking about volunteering, that sort of thing. Also said one of the other things that has really bothered us recently is the fact that a lot of times you don't have an option, that there's a race where nobody's running on the Democratic side. So if there's a race that y'all need a candidate for, I would consider that. One thing led to another. And, I was thinking to start small because I've never done anything in politics before. But he ended up asking if I'd be willing to run for state senate. Discussed it with my wife probably for about 3 weeks before I finally committed to doing it.
I gotcha. I mean, I don't know. The more I've got into trying to understand how this whole big debacle works, if you actually want to make anything functionally change, the state level's the only way you're really going to do it. The more I get to figuring this whole thing out, it's not to downplay the importance. I think city council, county commission, school board, and stuff like that are very important positions, and they do important things. But on the at least specifically like on the stuff that you were listing, that's all state level stuff. We can have a school board that likes or doesn't like what the state's telling them they can and can't do, but it really doesn't matter. The state's the one that gets to make the decision on it.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of what's bothered me too, is that they've started to just strip away control from localities. Like the banning of books, I know goes through a state board. Charter schools, you can be overridden by a state board. Even some other things as far as regulating, taking care of your local waterways and that sort of thing. The state has restricted what localities can actually do to try to mitigate some of the issues.
Yeah, I always said, like, that's one of the things I am trying to figure out as I'm learning more is the kind of the reasoning behind the whys. The real subdivision that matters though is the state. That's what it seems like to me. And it's just always interesting to me when you have the party of small government who's only small government when they control the small government and not when somebody else does. And so that's always an interesting little tidbit there. But there's some of the stuff I get and I don't get, and I think it's a weird mishmash of 200 and something years of state laws and law changes and stuff like that. Because, like, I don't know, like the charter school one to me, I find it, like, I understand it on some level that the school board should have some interest in it because it's going to be part of their funding that's going into doing this thing and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you're literally giving the competition the authority to not allow competition to come into play, which doesn't seem logical to me. Because on what, other than acknowledging a real need, why would a school board ever let a charter school in? Because they're just going to take their students and therefore their funding.
I kind of get what you're saying, but at the same time, you vote for the school board members, and especially now that it's political voting for school board members here in Tennessee, the voters kind of know where those school board members stand. So if they're voting for members that are against charters, that means they don't want charters in their communities. And I think a lot of people don't understand really the complete what charters and vouchers do, and how in some cases, like especially with vouchers, some people seem to think, well, I'm going to go send my kid to Webb or somewhere like that. And the reality is, no, you're still going to have to come up with
a lot,
$7,000 to $10,000 out of pocket a year.
Well, and that's another part of the current voucher conversation that I don't think people know what they're talking about. I think at large people don't know what they're talking about, because we were looking through it. One of my listeners sent me the TISA whatever link to the whatever website that kind of breaks it all down, and the way the current voucher program in Nashville and Memphis works, most people can't afford it. If you're eligible to get the voucher by income, which it's low enough, it's like I think it's 4 times the free lunch number, whatever that number is that's set by the federal government. If you make four times or less than that, then you're eligible to get the voucher from the state. Most private schools that I know of, you're not going to be able to even with the voucher afford the private school with the salary restriction that you have to be able to get it anyway. And so I think this is one of those things that this is where the politics drives me nuts, because we're spending a ton of time talking about vouchers that aren't really a threat as they currently stand. Now, I acknowledge the fact that this could be the beginnings of step 1 of 20 to get into a full vouchers thing or something like that. But at least to the step 1 version of it that everybody's been out of shape about, I don't think the majority of people understand how it's currently working.
Well, I think a lot of people are more bent out of shape about the charter side of it.
Okay.
Because charters, those are ones that are basically fully funded by the state for most of your charters, like the charter here in Knoxville, and most of them, they base their funding on what they get from the state, and there isn't a tuition for the student.
Right.
So they're taking complete state money, but they also get to pick and choose their students. And they aren't required to have the same facilities, the same programs, like when it comes to music and art programs, to develop the same well-rounded students as our public schools. So they're not held to the same standards as public schools, and we're giving them public money, while in many cases you end up with the more difficult students then in the public school systems, because the charters have taken and cherry picked the students they want out, that cost the public schools more. So not only are you moving funds away from public schools, you're also increasing the burden that they have to deal with the funds they have less, to a certain extent, because of the certain types of students that many times charters will not accept.
Right. I understand that. It's easier to run a school where you get to pick the students that are going to be easier to deal with through time. Like, and I don't know. This topic to me is infinitely fascinating, because I don't think most people understand what it is. And my problem with it is that I'm open to the idea. I'm open to the conversation. And that's enough for people to tell me I'm an idiot and that I don't deserve to talk about it. And that's where I get real frustrated in the conversation, because I think as a parent of students here in Knox County schools, there are some shortcomings that I don't really see getting addressed. I see more extra focus on and time and energy on things that I don't feel like are particularly important. And not that my opinion makes it right or wrong, but I don't think I'm the only parent. I'm actually 100% positive I'm not the only parent that's not particularly happy with what's going on in our schools. And the conversation is either you're a voucher person that wants to steal money from the schools, or your public schools are perfect the way they are. And I don't think either statement is true.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would argue our public schools are perfect, or at least from my perspective, the people I've talked to, that our public schools are perfect the way they are. We've been underfunding them for years. The BEP hadn't been updated since like 92 until now. So they've sort of set the public schools up to fail for a while by not doing it, and then they start attacking teachers and librarians and all this, building resentment towards them. And the proper answer should be to actually properly fund our schools, retain teachers, and I would argue also include like training in the trades and those sorts of things in our schools as well, and not understand that not every student is going to go to college or really wants to go to college.
Right.
I found I liked working and building stuff more than sitting in a cubicle.
I think I think that trend is coming to fruition. I think the reality of that is caught up. Mr. Biden helped us out with kicking some of us getting to kick some of our school funding down the road, or at least get rid of it for now and that kind of thing. But I don't know. That's a separate issue, because I don't really feel like it fixes any problems. It just kind of helps a few people out, which isn't a bad thing. But
the other problem I have with TISA is the financial cliff it looks like we're going to hit, I want to say by 2026 or 27. And like it's 3 or 4 years, so 25 or something like that. But it looks, the way the funding is now, essentially almost a $200 million shortfall is what it looks like is on the books right now for funding, which is going to fall back on the counties and result more likely than not in property tax increases across the entire state.
It does. I have heard some conversation about that, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around the understanding of it, because I can't remember, there's some fancy term for it, but you can't spend less than you did last year rule, whatever that rule is, that this new funding formula over time is going to put more weight on the counties. I'm still trying to figure that part out, but I understand that as a thing.
They basically allotted a certain amount, and it's only enough for this increased funding that they're saying is there. It's only enough for a few years. So that increased funding that they've allotted at this point essentially disappears, and it's going to have to be filled back in by the counties.
Right. Because the counties can't decrease the amount they're expending in a future year.
So it just feels like a very short-sighted bill to me.
Yeah, I don't understand. Like, that's one of the general issues I don't understand. Like, I don't understand how the state has gotten away with it for as long as they have. Like, it seems to me that it's been pretty clearly underfunded against what the old formula was, that they were underfunding for years.
Yes.
and counties were making up on it. And it's like, well, because again, this goes back to I think the general voter education is people understanding who's in charge of what and who's funding what. Because I don't think a lot of people quite understand how much county/state puts into the different amounts, or the city for that matter, the way it all breaks out.
No.
And so to be able to vote upon that and try to understand who's the right person to go to with this issue, I think's part of the problem as well. Because again, I think I don't know. I have all sorts of issues with school personally, and I'm a little bit more conspiratorial than most, and that's fine. But I think it's a weird dynamic to put the state for the state to keep itself in so much control, and this localities to keep saying, okay, like I don't understand how you can get a Nashville, and Memphis, or Knoxville for that matter to keep saying okay to taking on all this weight, when the majority of the voters in the state are of those 3 or 4 major counties, who seem to. I mean the big 5. What are they called? The big 5 counties or whatever. I mean, all the
Williamson, Franklin, Knox, Shelby, and I'm missing one. But yeah, we're pretty much everybody. We're the vast majority of the population of our state.
Yeah. And so, and it's like, well, why do we keep agreeing to what they call it, being donor counties in the school system, and we keep doing it year in and year out? And I guess that's part of the way the state legislature is set up that gives those rural counties a little bit more political swing.
I mean, the Senate,
right,
is where we're at, and so we have, I believe, 33 senators. So yeah, the rural counties get pretty much an equal say when it comes to that, and so yeah, they can keep it that way. And it's been 10 years. Like I said, the GOP took control of our legislature in 2010. They took over the governor shortly after, so they've had a decade. So at any point, if they really wanted to fund our schools, they could have. If they really wanted to help out workers, they could have raised the minimum wage. If they really supported women, they wouldn't have passed an abortion ban. So I think I just
to touch on that for a second. To me, I almost have as much issue with the idea of a trigger law as I do with the specific of what this one was. Like the idea that you can get elected, vote for a thing that may or may not ever take effect, so you have zero political fallout for the thing you voted for, because you never actually have to address and be in the seat when the thing happens. I think that in and of itself needs to cease to exist. I just think it's silly. It's a ridiculous concept in government that I can pass something that never actually goes into law per se until something random in the federal government happens, and I may or may not still be here for it.
No. Well, and if you go back and watch that video, they wanted that bill initially to be the one that overturned Roe. If you watch them discussing it in the Senate on the website, on the state site.
Oh, they wanted it to be the one that caused the case that went all the way up?
Yes.
They kicked it?
That was what they really wanted to be. There was some discussion about the trigger, whether or not they wanted to even have the trigger piece be on that. And I believe that was what Amendment 1 was. And then there was actually 2 amendments that offered exceptions that they voted down. One for the first, both brought by Senator Gilmore. The first one was just exceptions for all women and girls in Tennessee in the cases of rape, aggravated rape, and incest. They voted it down, and then then she brought Amendment 3. That was the exact same, except in the case for underage women and girls in Tennessee. And girls in Tennessee, and they voted that down as well.
Yeah,
and then passed it.
Because again, I think
they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting little tidbits that's unclear about it is that there is no exception in the current stance. It's there is an affirmative defense for those who did it. You have to prove that you did it for a good reason.
Yeah,
which
to
me
puts
means it in
being
a weird
charged and going to court.
Right.
Isn't that?
Right.
That? Oh, you.
And I'd be curious what the state medical board does if you're in active criminal investigation as a doctor. On how your licensure holds up and stuff like that through the process. Yep. I don't believe that you should have to have a license in the way, but that's a separate whole debacle. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole. Okay, so we've talked school stuff. We've talked kind of more trigger law than the abortion thing, but the abortion thing kind of came out through it. When you're out running your campaign, what are the big, obviously those are a couple. What are some of your biggest items that you like that either you lead with or that you're getting feedback from door knockers and stuff like that?
Okay, so my biggest thing is, I'm for women's rights. I'd like to repeal the abortion ban. I support workers' rights. Vote no on Amendment 1. I support if workers feel like they need to organize. There's probably a problem with the way that company's treating their employees.
Okay.
So I think they should have that right. I mean, if your company is taking care of your employees, they don't really feel the need to organize. Probably the biggest one that I get kind of the more surprise feedback, and it's kind of one of my personal things that doesn't get a whole lot of play, is what's been going on with the waterways here in Tennessee. So like I said, they took over in 2010, and as of 2010, per the Tennessee Department of Water Resources, 32.4% of the waterways in the entire state, that's lakes, rivers, streams, were classified as being impaired, which essentially means they can't serve one of the functions the state assigned to them. The two that are pretty much assigned to every waterway and that are the most common reason for impairment are fish and aquatic life and recreation. Recreation being fishing, swimming, wading. So, like I said, 32.4% in 2010. As of 2020, that number is now 55.4%. Pretty much 50% of it is due to E. coli contamination.
Which is a wastewater issue where
yes,
utilities are not properly. Well, that or just people pooping in the lake, but either way.
There's two main factors in this. One is wastewater, particularly sanitary overflow, which is the result of places like here in Knoxville, where our population has grown so fast, and we're sitting at something like 97% capacity of housing here in the city, or in this area, actually in the city and surrounding area, that our sewage systems haven't been upgraded, and they can barely handle the load on them just from the population. So when we get these heavy rainfalls and these flood warnings like we did last night, that's when because it all goes in there, it overflows and goes into runoff into the freshwater runoff areas and overflow offshoots. So then you're getting human fecal waste during all this flooding stuff. The other one is agricultural runoff, and stormwater runoff creates these things. So in that time period, the Tennessee GOP has passed a few bills that have once again limited localities' ability to manage these situations. Like they can't require contractors to do certain things with the stormwater when they're building developments. So a lot of these developments around here that have come up recently, all the stormwater drains in the street, they just go to the nearest waterway. Then you have
so let me make sure I'm following correctly. So the state has made it so that the city or the county can't say, "Hey, okay, we'll approve this development, but you have to do X, Y, Z for stormwater retention and stuff like that." We can't locally require that anymore.
Exactly. We can't locally require that anymore.
Okay.
So, and then the other one, which is basically the same situation where localities can't require, like in that case, say, we'll approve this development, but you have to connect to the municipal system so that we can contain it. So the other one is with farms, agricultural feed operations, commercial agricultural feed operations. I believe it's SB 899 when it was passed. And basically what it did was it said that localities could no longer put restrictions on how the waste was dealt with by any operation that had less than 1,000 animal units. And when you hear 1,000 animal units, you don't think very much of that. You're like, okay, 1,000 animals, that's not much. But I looked into what an animal unit is. Each animal unit accounts for 1,000 pounds of animals on your farm.
Huh.
So when you take this up, multiply that out, that's 1 million pounds. So that's like 125,000 chickens before you reach EPA federal regulations.
Right.
So if you have 120,000 chickens or like 50,000 pigs, you can just have their waste. You don't have to have a waste retention pond that allows it to filter out or anything. It can just go straight into whatever waterway is running on your property. There's not really any way to regulate that, and they have tied the hands of localities to create regulations where they have issues. Right. Like in my district, there's not one waterway that is not impaired in my district.
So as long as your farm is less than federal EPA pounds of animals,
yep,
you can do whatever you want. Interesting, because I mean that actually kind of surprises me, because in comparables, it's quite often that the federal government figures out ways to get their hands into whatever size industry. Because like if you run a small business, like this business of the podcast, since it is on the internet, I'm there for interstate commerce, even though my entire goal and target is for not even to leave the county. But the fact that somebody in New York State could pull this up and listen to it puts me under federal guidelines on everything that I do as far as employment relations and stuff like that. I don't have any employees, so it's easy, but that kind of, like, I find that fascinating just in the specifics, because like my other business that I own, we're now at 8 employees, which puts us under federal guidelines, but we had a Facebook page, so it didn't matter. I have a brick and mortar in Knoxville that only sells to people in Knoxville, but I have a Facebook page, so I'm therefore on the interstate commerce list.
Okay.
Which is weird.
Do you sell through Facebook?
No. I just have a Facebook page and a website.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it falls under interstate commerce because somebody from Kentucky can see that I exist and make plans to travel to come to me, even though I don't know, whatever. So that's one of those weird isms to me. Okay, so well, back up. We were talking about something else, and I wanted to come back to it, and I lost it. So we were talking about teachers in schools and stuff like that, and one of the things that's kind of hot topic right now is Governor Lee's office put out some guidelines as far as this library cataloging debacle that kicked in this year, and at least all the actual physical libraries in Knox County have their catalogs online and available for parents as per the law. But Lee's guidelines was, hey, not just in the library, it's in your classrooms too. So if you have a small library as a teacher, and I've heard a lot of outcry from teachers on this one, and I'm a little confused on it, only in so much as that it seems to me like this is an oversight issue. This is teachers not liking the idea that they have to conform to an oversight, but at the same time, there's lots of oversights like the EPA or the local governments having some control over their wastewater situation that we're comfortable with, but we're not comfortable with this one. Where are you at on that?
So I pretty much trust our teachers, and part of the issue is that that's never.
But you don't trust a farmer or a businessman.
I'm not saying that either.
Well, but I mean,
I'm saying this is a totally different level of this. What they're talking about right now, in a lot of cases, when we're talking about the teacher thing specifically, is that these are teachers that have built up these books for years. Okay, so they have, in many cases, hundreds of books, and they have to go through and identify, write down. And there's like a whole list of things they have to put for every book and go through it. So we're already underpaying our teachers, which you've already agreed that we've underfunded our schools and everything. So we're already doing that, and now we're asking them to do even more on top of that, so that in the end we can restrict learning. And
well, I mean, those two are not necessarily equatable. I agree that we're adding weight to the teacher's responsibility of things they need to do to make this thing exist. Because, like you said, they've had years of doing it without having to catalog it, and now they have to go back and catalog. You know, just like, I mean, I'm sure the libraries had the same issue. If they were cataloging them cleanly over the last decade or two, it wouldn't be that big a deal just to update for what I added this year from last year. Yeah. I understand that as a thing, and I am certainly willing to acknowledge the idea that we put too much on our teachers as far as other than teaching. Here's a mountain of things you have to do as a teacher, and that's a lot of it comes from the state level. I don't disagree with that part of it, but the idea that that having some oversight on a thing that's viewable and interaction based to the public, the parents specifically, being an automatic negative, I kind of take issue with.
I don't necessarily take it as being automatic negative. I think the negative is how they implemented and how quickly they made it a rule. So that now these teachers, because they're in fear for their jobs because of the rhetoric against teachers recently, that if some kid grabs a book that their parent happens not to like, that they're going to be fighting to keep their job at this point. So now they've just had to close off their libraries that in many cases are books that students and like parents have just donated to them over the years, that they saw them. They're like, okay, these are all kids' books. Yes, put them in their stacks, and didn't really. It wasn't a cataloging thing at the time. So, yeah,
So the issue is not
I don't
the
think
fact
it's necessarily
that it exists.
a bad thing, but I think it was once again something that this was poorly implemented. If they wanted that to happen, then
well, I mean,
it's
government. Of course, it's poorly implemented. That's a given. But you know,
particularly on certain sides.
Well, I mean, I suppose, but I'm just saying, like, I mean, it's poorly, like, you know, where everybody's complaining about the PPP loans all of a sudden because we've been over those for 2 years. but it's a hot topic again, and it's like, well, of course it was poorly done. Of course, there's plenty of people that went fraudulent on it because that's what people do, and especially when the government's giving out cash, you take it. Anyway, that was an aside. I don't know why I brought the PPP loans up, but I don't know. Like, I guess the like I wholly understand and agree that to say, hey, you've got 1,000 books in your classroom, I need to know what they are today, is kind of ridiculous ask, and poor implementation. I acknowledge that part, but I don't know. That's not how I've seen the conversation from at least my news feed, for lack of a better word. The conversation is how ridiculous it is that we aren't trusted as teachers. And it's like, well, we don't trust a lot of people
when they want to trust them with a gun, but they don't want to trust them with the books.
I mean, I don't know.
I'm sorry. That you can't say you can trust them with a gun, but you don't trust them with a book. So it is kind of ridiculous.
Okay.
So, I mean, teachers have never had to do that in years. I never had a problem with it. I went all the way through public schools. I've never had a problem with any of my daughter's teachers when it comes to that sort of thing. And I'm also a parent, so if my daughter comes across something, I'm cool with kind of explaining it to her and talking to her about it.
Sure, I agree.
I feel like the people who are like, oh, no government control, are trying to create a nanny state by controlling every aspect of what you can learn, what you can read, that sort of thing.
So weird.
To a certain extent. I mean,
right? No, I get it, but that's what's so weird about it to me is that I don't know. I think it's an interesting little snapshot of how weird we are as a society at this point, in that we really don't trust the game anymore. And I don't know how much I don't know. Like, I'm trying to figure out how do I word this? This is a tough one. Like, I don't know that it's okay. Let me kind of switch gears on and ask a question. Like, through the history of the United States at large, or maybe the state of Tennessee, if we want to stay that way, what is the goal of public schooling? What was the point from the beginning?
The goal of public schooling is to create an educated base for industry and development, and to have a society capable of thought and imagination and being able to create the things like the space program and, even to the point of nuclear power. I mean, without electricity, all these things, that we have developed computers, this is all the result of school. There's so much that has become as the result of learning, and especially public schools, that teaches you the base things: reading, writing, math, how to communicate, how to do research, those sorts of things, depending on what grade progression you go through.
Okay. All right. See, I guess that's part of where I get a little sidetracked on it, because I don't know how much, as I understand the history of the United States education system, that as it's been as I've read up on it, at least, is that the idea is it was the old Austrian model, that we want a population that's smart enough to operate the machines but not smart enough to figure out why, and we want a population that was willing to go to war when we ask them to. And maybe that's an oversimplification, but I feel like it's a semi-accurate to the history of U.S. education system. And so if the point is just to build more factory workers, then I guess that's what we could do. But I don't know. I question how effective the school system is beyond that in the last couple decades.
Okay. Well, I mean, as we both agreed, it's hard to be as effective as you can be when you're being underfunded and understaffed. And that's something we have a major issue right now. Right.
And I agree with you. I think I absolutely think it's intentional. Like, I don't disagree with the intentionality of it.
So the point is, let's try to actually properly fund our schools and get our students the resources to prepare them for, in the trades, going to school, if they want to do science, math, properly give these students an opportunity and a path to do those things, to become happy members of society that can actually chase the American dream, and maybe someday be able to buy a house if we can,
ever figure out that thing. Right.
Yeah. If I'd stop REITs, corporations, and conglomerates from buying up single family housing.
I do. I do think these large trust or hedge funds and stuff like that being part of the rental game is quite problematic.
Yes.
Okay, so when I saw one of your posts at least that you're on the pro pot team.
Yes.
What is like if you could set up the state of Tennessee on legal marijuana, how would you set that up?
Well, I think we're gonna have to go with the 21 model because that's alcohol and cigarettes and everything. So legalize. I would do recreational legalization across the board. It will do multiple things as far as creating small business opportunities, creating job opportunities for Tennesseans. It will give our farmers access to another cash crop that they can use to help support their families and improve their facilities.
That's not as hard on the ground.
Yeah, that's not as hard as on the ground or anything else. And then we can hopefully use the tax revenue from that to properly fund our schools,
right,
and do some of these upgrades that I'm talking about, and at least the majority of that to those things, and then hopefully maybe some of it if the revenue is enough to help with some infrastructure projects and those sorts of things, like upgrading our sewer systems to handle the load and the future load.
I think one of the sales pitches to me that anybody that goes on the pro pot, because I don't smoke, doesn't really matter to me. I'm in the industry adjacent, whatever you want to call it, but we need to do it now. Everybody, like I had Massey on like 2 years ago and we were talking about it, and Massey was basically like, yeah, at some point this federal government's going to make it deschedule it and it's going to be federally legal. And it's like, well, that's why we need to do it before. I think it's an important substrain of the argument is that it needs to be done before we go federally legal, because then that gets growing, distribution, retail, all that stuff as Tennesseans, not because I know for me and my day job that if it went federally legal tomorrow and the Tennessee catches up eventually, I'm not going to buy it from some guy in Maynardville. I'm going to buy it from California or Colorado.
Yeah,
because they've been doing it for a decade now and they put out better product.
Yeah, I mean that's something else that I want to make sure we avoid that California ran into, is that the buy-in for permits and everything is not so exorbitant that you price out small businesses and small individuals trying to start a small business. Make sure there is some level of fairness in that, where we're not just favoring over the corporations that can just flat out afford $150,000 permit,
right?
Up front.
Right, that is one of my fears about it. When and if we do get around to it, there's going to be like the old liquor permits in the state where there was 150 of them, and the only way you're opening a liquor store in the state of Tennessee is if you buy a permit from somebody who has one, or somebody dies and you happen to be first on the list.
Now, I want to make sure that people who want to do it and can, verify their product, that sort of thing, however we set it up, that it's not cost prohibitive for the smaller people, like the smaller groups in Tennessee that are trying to do something. Like I said, that's something that was an issue in California, and they're still kind of having an issue with a little bit.
Speaking of California, and you were talking about how you feel about labor earlier. California is discussing, I think it's it may have passed this morning. I don't remember exactly what the timeline was, but they're talking about a sector-based kind of labor thing. I don't know. I've never heard of it. This is the first time I've heard of something like this, where essentially the state will create, will basically function as the union head by sector. So it's not McDonald's employees union, it's fast food workers union administered by the state. And so anybody that would be under the same level of employment according to the state definition, fast food workers being the example we're working with, would fall under the same protections that the union style, I guess, but state operated. I'm still trying to figure out the details of how this thing works.
I haven't heard about this, so I'll definitely have to look into that. I mean, the only way I could, where I thought you were going with this was with minimum wage, where you say we go to a $15 minimum wage across the state of Tennessee. Well, $15 in certain areas of Tennessee means a whole lot different than 15 hours in, say, Nashville.
Right. I think the way the California thing would work, it would be that fast food work would be $15 an hour. Certain industries of production work, basic manufacturing, that industry would be at an $18 an hour minimum wage, and it would break it down into all these subsectors inside the state, and they would have a framework that the companies are allowed to work within on those sectors.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I will have to look into that.
I'm
No,
curious to understand it a little better. I feel like it's a bad idea, but it's also California, and a lot of things California
it
does end up being a bad
it
idea. So
seems, yeah. I don't know what I think about that. I just, eh. I mean, I'd be interested to learn more and see what happens, but uh, yeah, I don't know if that would work here either.
okay, so in the more reasonable, what you've actually thought about as far as labor relations in the state of Tennessee, what are some top issues for you? Obviously, minimum wage getting up to at least 15 sounds like one for you.
Yeah, increasing the minimum wage, and allowing employees to organize. I mean, this whole right to work amendment is kind of, to me, it just seems like a political call out to their benefactors, like to corporations, I guess, because we already have that law on the books. All this, so they're basically just trying to enshrine it in our Constitution so that in the future, if it decides to get repealed, it'll be that much harder to ever let it be repealed.
Because best case scenario for anybody out there who doesn't know any better yet, if it's a constitutional amendment, best case scenario, it's a 4-year process.
Yeah,
and that would mean 2 consecutive sessions of everything going well, and then the next gubernatorial ballot you get it on there. But the best case scenario is if this passes and there's a problem with it, it can't be fixed until 26.
Yeah. And that's if we start right away.
Right.
So yeah, I just don't like the idea of amending our Constitution to that. And
I mean, to be fair, I still don't quite understand it. We've talked about it. I've read through it a couple times. I can't read. Apparently, again, going back to my joke about problems with the education system, I can't read the way these things are written to understand them, because the way it reads to be, and we pulled it up, like from the 111th Senate or whatever, and as we pulled it up and looked at it and all that, it reads to be that it is, as an employer, if I'm an employer and my workforce unionizes,
mm-hmm.
and I want to hire somebody in other states, at least to date or something like that, that generally speaking, if I were to hire somebody, they're automatically joining the union that is in my union shop that I'm the business owner of. And what the state of Tennessee is saying, that's not necessary. If you as the new employee choose not to join said union, that is your right. That's my basic understanding of how I'm reading this constitutional change for number 1.
It's pretty much so, but the effect of it is that it weakens unions. It weakens their power, because what unions fight for,
because
and those
as the
rights that they get,
as the employer, I'm going to hire people
there. Yeah, so you're going to keep trying to hire people that are out of the unions. Then once the union's weak enough, then you can start taking back some of those things.
Right.
So the reality is, and the truth is, that's already the case of our state. There's not a union-only shop in our state. They can't really exist because of the right to work law that's already on the books. So they're essentially doing the exact same thing, just trying to make it a constitutional amendment to the Tennessee State Constitution. And it just seems like playing politics. There's no real reason to do this other than to pander to corporations and business owners that want to eventually do that, because they already have that here.
Right.
Just to tell them, well, you know what? Even if we lose power, we got your back forever. So that's why the fact that this is even on there kind of bothers me.
Right. I mean, again, like I definitely, with the makeup of the Senate and the House of the last decade or so, it makes sense to me that this is something that they would put in and it would pass 2 times through. I'm still trying to figure out the other ones. I'm not going to bother you with that because you didn't put it there. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
That's what I said. I'm trying to get Massey or Manis to come on and explain it to me, because they're actually my reps and I feel like they owe it to me.
I mean, so Briggs tried to criminalize CBD this past session, right?
I do. I'm not a Briggs fan for that reason.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that the old army doctor or whatever hates weed. Yeah. And it's like, well, come on, man. I mean, well, I get it. Like, it's the same thing though. It's like to me, it's such an old, it's just old stigma.
Yeah.
And especially in that generation and up,
mm-hmm.
You were raised on the reefer madness and the evils of marijuana and stuff like that. And this new world that we live in, where it's pretty clear that nobody cares. Yeah. And I just don't understand it on the political point of it. Like, I get it, because it's not a win. of all the issues that we've talked about today and all the issues that are on your agenda that we haven't talked about and stuff like that, at the end of the day, sure, you might get a handful of people to vote for you because of your stance on marijuana in the state of Tennessee, but that's not what's going to win this election for you.
No.
Even though, I mean, if Tennessee is close to the national average, like 70-something% either are pro legalization or at least completely apathetic and would care less if it did. So you're not going to lose as a politician for voting for it, but you're not going to win a race either. And that's what sucks to me is like the system is so busted that something that we in the public generally agree it's not that big a deal, but it's not a political win for you, and it's not a political loss for a Briggs or a Massey or the Republicans that are still. I mean, although Massey is actually kind of pro, she's pro medical. But it's not something that's like so obviously a loss politically that we can get something like this done.
And I think if we win in November, at least
you say when.
When
you say when we win.
Oh, when we win, yeah. Well, I wasn't talking about just me. I'm talking about across the board.
And you still say when. You got to you got to put the positive.
So yeah, when we win in November,
there it is.
That will send a nice little message, I think. And there's already people across the aisle, particularly on that issue, that are willing to, especially if we can also get Jason Martin in at the governor's office. I think that will be something that happens in Tennessee within the next couple years.
That's a bold. I guess when you win is a bold statement in and of itself. So
but there's actually a fair bit of support across the aisle too, from what I understand from other members, not the one I'm running against.
I mean, I think you take anybody that's been around long enough, because you've lived here long enough. You remember when the lottery came in. You know, the lottery wasn't about, oh, this is a good way for us to raise money. Oh, this is, a good thing to do. Oh, the population wants it. It was never about that. It was how much money is going into Kentucky? How much money is going into Georgia? People are literally taking day trips to go out of state to buy Powerball tickets. Yeah. And that's Tennessee's money that we're losing. Oh, okay, let's get on board with that. That, to me, in and of itself, is the number one sales pitch for legal weed.
Yeah, it's not only are we not giving Tennesseans the freedoms that hundreds of thousands, millions of other Americans have, but we're also leaving all that money on the table
and spending money trying to stop it.
Leaving that money on the table that could help us fund schools and roads and infrastructure, and like I said, help our farmers, give them a cash crop that I would think would grow quite fantastically here in the ground in Tennessee, and give them another revenue source. So, I mean, I just don't see a lose with the legalization.
Yeah, people might be happy with their own lives. That'd be terrible.
So, yeah.
I mean,
and that's my whole thing. That's a big reason why I'm running is I just want to work to help Tennesseans, and that's what I think should be the point of government, is to protect our state for future generations. If you're a business, you want to make money, I am completely fine with that. That is the point of a business. But just take care of your workers and take care of our state when you do it. You want to make money after that? That's fine. But those two requirements, don't continue to destroy a state to where my daughter and her kids, if she decides to have kids, aren't going to have a river or something that they can go take the dog out to, or go kayaking in, or go hike up through the mountains, and there's just no animal base left because we've hacked down all the trees or something like that. I mean, I'm not saying that particular thing's happening here in Tennessee. The waterway thing is happening here in Tennessee right now. So yeah, that's my main thing with business and everything. I'm not anti-business or anything like that. I just want you to take care of your workers and our state as you conduct your business here.
All right. So just for funnies, because it's something that I follow, but I wouldn't be surprised if you don't really know much about it. Where do you stand on TWRA's independence from the way it operates within the state?
Okay. No, refresh me.
Okay. Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency. It's the hunters, whatever.
Okay.
There's been a couple of recent little upticks. And this is one of those where the local and the state and the TWRA, being a semi-independent agency within the state, have kind of all butted heads. Last session, they tried to pass a bill which basically said that any income the TWRA generates would go into the general fund, which right now they get to keep it and do what they want with it. And it's one of those, we talk, we're hunters on me and my buddies that do this show. And so we talk very positively, very often about TWRA, but I kind of get the argument at the same time. And so I'm curious what other people's stances on it are who aren't necessarily in the hunting pro TWRA camp
honestly.
would
I
be.
will look it up. I wrote it down a note here. So I
Okay.
could go back and kind of
It's
do some more research
like I
on
said,
it.
it's an
But
interesting
no,
little subset.
this is why I like talking to people.
Like
I
it was
like hearing about stuff like this.
It was down in like Ooltewah, Chattanooga area. There was like it was like 1,000+ acres of TWA land. The state owns it. TWA manages the land. And TWA decided for waterfowl habitat that they wanted to clear a bunch of forest. And whenever they do a forest clearing, they bring in loggers to come do it, and they pay for a logging license and go log those trees. TWA takes that money and they spend it on agents or whatever they spend it on, including rehabbing this land into a marshland or whatever to get waterfowl there. And so then people can go get their permits and go waterfowl hunting on the land and stuff like that. And so, but the local, I can't remember which county it was specifically, but the county or the local township was really not happy with the idea of this forest getting logged. And so there was some different back and forth. And at some point, I can't remember who brought it on the floor of the Senate, trying to basically as a threat to TWA, it says, if you go ahead with this kind of thing, we're going to make it so that when you sell anything as TWA, we get the money in the state and you don't get to keep it. So it's an interesting subset. I don't know. Like, I'm not sure where I stand on the thing. It's a crazy little, it's the problem with how complicated this is.
Private and government thing.
Yeah, and it's
intertwined,
and it's a very complicated. It's one of the many super complicated things that we have to try to, and it only matters to me because it matters to me. My neighbor could care less about some forest in Ooltewah. Like it's not. I mean, they might if they're hunters too or not. But I'm just saying, in the general scheme of things, if it's not important to you, it's not important to you. So why would you follow it? And so it's a.
Oh. For me, that's kind of going to be my job, right?
Well, yes, that is your job, but those of us out here in working normal jobs and raising kids and doing all that kind of stuff that don't spend all our time on politics and government and policy and stuff like that have a good chance of missing out on these kind of things. I need to relook up. It's been a month or so since that kind of went all down. I mean, obviously it's out of session, so and that's another one for me. And I'll say this is my pitch to you, even though I'm not technically a constituent of yours. When you win. That website sucks. The state website is terribly unapproachable, I guess, for lack of a better word. There's bills that we've tried to chase over the last year. The Briggs one that you're talking about was one that's very important to me in my professional life. And the summary on that said something about Department of Agriculture's deadline to turn in some sort of research documentation went back 16 days. That's what the summary of that House bill, at least on the House side, was. I don't remember what the summary in the Senate side was. And so I'm trying to chase down anything that has to do with my businesses, trying to understand it. And the summary tells me that just change the deadline. It's no big deal. And then by the time it gets through subcommittee, it's a full ban on a lot of product throughout the state.
Yeah. I've had the same thing going back through and looking, like I was talking about, going back and looking at the Human Life Protection Act, which is the abortion ban, and trying to find that, especially if it's not in the most current session. It's kind of interesting trying to navigate the state's website. So I feel your pain there, because I'm doing a lot of that, just going back and doing research and seeing where votes were and that sort of thing.
Right on. Okay. So, well, give me some plugs. Get how the people get a hold of you, how to learn more about your campaign, and then I'll do an outro and we'll call it a show.
All right. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you having me, Seth. My name is Bryan Langan. That's Langan. My website is. That's why I spelled it there. Whatever. Langan, the number 4tn.com.
Okay.
You can go to my website, find out more. You can donate there. And if you send an email to that website or happen to call the phone on that website, they both come directly to my cell phone. So, and as you can attest to, emailing me through that website.
It gets there.
So, yeah.
We got back and forth. It was about 15 emails to get the show put together, but then I had to get COVID and we had to change it to a Zoom show. It was going to be in person and all that kind of stuff. So it was a busy back and forth, but I'm complicated and I understand that. So that's all right. Plus I'm not a constituent, so you got to deal with my media-ness.
It wasn't bad. I was just making sure we had time setups and everything right. So.
And I appreciate taking the time and you jumping on here to do this with me. I enjoyed it very much. I think there's a lot of stuff that's going on that's important that I think people need to know what these things are and who's the actual person that can make a real difference in how these things work in our day-to-day lives as Tennesseans. And I think, like I said in the beginning, I think one of the things that I've learned that is the number one bottom line, most honest, how government works in the state of Tennessee is the state legislature. Both bodies, those are the people that make the biggest and most impactful changes to your day-to-day life. County commission, city council, local mayors are important. I mean, even the governor is below all of those to me. The way the governorship's set up, it's a weak governorship. This legislature passes something, governor doesn't have to sign it. It's still going through.
No,
there's and so it's interesting to me that we have the city of Knoxville has a strong mayor format and the state of Tennessee has a weak governor format. Find that an interesting little dichotomy of the two bodies being the complete opposite on the way their executive branch controls the situation. But alas, that's what I got. I appreciate you, Bryan. I really had a good time. I'm doing an outro and we're gonna call it a day, buddy.
Awesome. Appreciate you having me. Feel free to reach out again if you want to.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks. See y'all.
See you, man. Bryan Langan, everybody. We did a show. We talked about a lot of different things, and I think that's I don't know. That to me, that's what's important. There's policy issues. There's stuff that actually makes a difference to your day-to-day life that we're going to have to deal with as citizens in this state. And if we just keep electing whatever and not paying attention, then we're just going to deal with whatever and not pay attention. But I guess it's good for me. It keeps me a show. We can sit and complain all we want, and that's why talking heads like me exist, is to complain about stuff. So we're almost in agreement. almostinagreement@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. Go to our website, almostinagreement.com. While you're there, go to the Voter Guide 22. We'll have a link to this show, a link to my Amanda Collins show, a link to anybody else in this November's coming up election. And we'll keep working through as many people as we can. I'm going to set up Gloria. I'm going to try to get Mr. Briggs in. Like I've mentioned a couple times, I'm trying to get Massey or Manis to come in and just break down the 4 ballot items because I really want to understand what each one of them will actually do if and when they're passed. So we're gonna keep working on that as well as some of these other races. So appreciate all y'all. Have a great afternoon, and we'll talk to y'all soon.